Hi everyone. I feel like talking today, so this is probably going to be a bit of a ramble. If you're not up for a ramble, maybe another YouTube video would be more fitting. Otherwise, feel free to stick around and hear what I have to say. As always, I would welcome any responses in the comments section, and I'll engage as I'm able. I've been thinking a lot lately about individuality and groups and labels and how we conduct ourselves, civilly. As it relates to a lot of research I've been doing on feminism, a lot of research I've been doing on sort of civil rights and equal rights, struggles of different races and that sort of thing. And what that means in terms of the individual, even things like, privilege, and what that means to the individual's life experience and the individual's ability to, seek life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and all that fine stuff. Now, I have a bit of an aversion to labels and joining groups. This has come up for me in the past, even saying that I didn't want to self-identify as an atheist. And what I've realized is that problem, if you want to call it a problem, for me goes much deeper than that. I don't like associating myself with very many groups at all. And that probably stems from my childhood. I was raised kind of out in the boondocks, and I wasn't really that socialized outside of school, and even the school that I was in was very small. And my parents were both very individualistic. They were sort of definitely their own people. And so I've always grown up with this sort of notion of being quite an individual and not really wanting to adopt labels and completely invest myself in any particular group. Heck, I even own a Harley, and after joining the Harley Owners Group and attending a couple of functions, I realized that stuff just wasn't for me. And I'm a lone wolf. I ride alone, as dangerous as that might even sometimes be. I do play well with others, and I get along with people, but joining these groups and adopting labels and all the attendant baggage that comes with those labels has just never really been for me. And I feel fortunate that is my experience. It may or may not be better for me, but I kind of feel like it is. And, when I juxtapose that with a lot of people who really seem to identify with groups and what that ends up sort of becoming, I feel even more so. So, I understand, when it comes to equal rights and those sorts of things, that in the initial stages of a movement where you have identified that there's a group of people that are not being treated fairly, that you need to identify that group. And you probably do need to form a coalition of people banded together to make the necessary inroads to strive for equality for that group. And you have to identify the ways in which they're not being treated fairly, et cetera, et cetera. Once that has taken place and it's become accepted, however, by the civilization and it's reflected in law, I think it's time for the group to disband. Now, I understand that, time-honored traditions and people's thought processes don't always change that fast. So even though you have a legal acceptance of equal rights, that doesn't mean everyone is going to succumb and act, fairly in that manner. So sometimes these groups are going to need to stay together longer to fight for individual cases and that sort of thing. I understand all that. I realize it's much more complex than that. But what I see is this issue where these groups at some point, it's almost like I would liken it to the Terminator, to the Skynet, where this vast computer system is designed and it's actually designed to do our bidding, to protect us. And at some point it becomes self-aware. And that's what I almost see with a lot of these groups. And not even just, feminist groups and racial groups, but even groups that are designed around, I don't want to name any names specifically, but designed around finding a cure for a particular disease. At some point, there's enough infrastructure there and there's enough people whose livelihoods depend on it, I almost have to question how badly they would really want to find a cure. And when it comes to these groups, one would think that the primary goal of a group like that would be that the group no longer needs to exist. that should be the primary, motivation for any of those groups that's designed towards achieving equal rights for a particular race, gender, or even a group that gathers together to fight a cure for a disease or to fight any other cause. Their ultimate goal should be that they no longer need to exist. And unfortunately, what I see is this self-awareness. This group, it becomes self-important. And I think that's very dangerous. And, it's funny, I made a video yesterday talking about Bill O'Reilly, and they were talking about denial. And I see a lot of this denial within these groups, and this is sort of the hallmark, I think, when the people within that group identify more with the group than they do with themselves as an individual or with the particular thing that they're trying to accomplish, to the point where they'll have this confirmation bias. And I've seen just a shit ton of this confirmation bias. So, I don't want to get too deep into the Ferguson thing, because I actually was planning on making another video, a video response to Enigma Hood about a video that he made. But what I've seen recently is a comparison, a direct comparison between the Ferguson shooting death of Michael Brown and this recent chokehold death. They both had grand juries and they both chose not to indict. And I'm watching Fox News, watching Bill O'Reilly, and Megyn Kelly's show as well, and seeing the people that they interview on there. And the people that they're interviewing, both black men, are treating both of those cases exactly the same. And they're treating them the same, of course, because it was a white police officer and a black male that ended up dying. And they've treated them the same. But of course, the facts of those two cases are not the same. The chokehold death, I think, is a pretty clear indication. There's pretty clear indications there. I mean, you can even hear the guy saying that he can't breathe in the video. There's some pretty clear indications that the officer acted, at the very least, irresponsibly. There was a lot of negligence going on there. He broke the protocol and the whole works. Whereas in the Michael Brown shooting, there's a lot of evidence that things actually took place in the manner in which Darren Wilson reported. And he had never really changed his story. His story was the same sort of from day one, and it sounds like the majority of the eyewitnesses, who are also black, agree with him, etc., etc. I don't want to talk too much more about that case, but the point I'm trying to make is there's been no differentiation made in the discussions that I've seen between those two incidents. And the reason is, of course, because they're saying this is a black lives don't matter, This is a societal thing, that black lives don't matter. And even when Bill O'Reilly, and I'm not sure of the accuracy of his figures here, but even when Bill O'Reilly was talking to one of the other, he might have been a member of the Black Caucus, but I can't quite remember. In any case, he was talking to him and he said, well, the black fellow was saying it's an epidemic. It's an epidemic of white cops shooting black men. And Bill O'Reilly said, well, do you know the figures? In 2012, there was 105 or something like that black men killed by white police officers. And it was 300 some white men killed. And of course, he just wouldn't ingest that, this fellow, right? He just would not ingest those numbers. Now, I don't know if those numbers are accurate, but he would have at least had to have said, well, if those numbers are accurate, you have a point. However, I distrust your figures or whatever. He did counter by saying, well, there are more white people in America than there are black. So that might explain the 3 times number. But I think you would have to also pull in the crime demographics into that, right? The point that I'm trying to make here is a confirmation bias. He's got a narrative, and those figures don't support his narrative, so he's going to completely disregard. And the narrative is supported by comparing the Ferguson shooting and this chokehold death and treating them as though they're the same, because for all intents and purposes for that narrative, they are the same. Black guy dies, white guy is the person who facilitated that. And I just think it's dangerous. I think it's unfortunate. I think, each case should be treated individually, and that gets back to the individuality that I struggle with, because I think when it comes to equality and feminists and racial equality seekers, there's kind of two things going on here. On the one hand, there is a desire to say, hey, listen, you can't treat people differently based on a particular characteristic as a group. You know, black people, women, Hispanic, whatever the group is, you should not discriminate against people based on that particular characteristic. But the other part of this is, hey, treat me as an individual. Don't see me as gender, race, whatever. See me as an individual, accept or reject me based on the content of my character, of who I am. And I think that's actually quite healthy. And in some ways, I kind of think that's what misguided people like Anita Sarkeesian are getting at when they start talking about the myth that men are stronger than women. Okay, I'm being very charitable here to Anita. I recognize that, but you know, she has said this, right? That it's a complete myth. It's a gender stereotype, and it's a myth that men are stronger than women, which is a complete baloney. I mean, let's have a tug of war. You know, I mean, sure, there are women who are stronger than men. I'm probably stronger than, I don't know, I would guess conservatively 60% of the women on the planet, probably quite a bit more than that, but let's call it 60%. But that also means that there are a certain number of women that are stronger than me, and I think that's the point, is don't assume who I am as a person based on my gender. Let me prove that to you in whatever arena we're speaking, right? And I think that is an important point to make. But then we seem to have this identification, this rampant identification with the particular group. And then when you listen to a group speaking, I've listened to a lot of Bell Hooks videos I mentioned recently. When I listen to a lot of these feminist lectures and discussion panels, they're extolling the virtues of black women. They, on the one hand, sort of saying, you know, don't judge us based on this thing, and then look at how wonderful this thing is. And I mean, I think you have to be careful both ways. I think it's for the same reason. If I were a black person and Barack Obama comes on the scene, I certainly would not vote for him just because he was black. And one has to admit that that happened in a lot of cases. And I think you have to be careful of doing that because, of course, obviously you should be voting for a public figure into public office based on the content of their platform and their track record, whether or not they keep the promises that they make, their campaign promises and things like that. If you vote for them, of course, simply because they happen to look a little bit like you, then you're hitching your wagon to that. And of course, there's a flip side. And they discuss this a little bit in the Bell Hooks stuff. I think ultimately, individuality is what's important here. I think we should treat one another as individuals, and I think we should expect to be treated as individuals. And I think that would take care of a lot of the equality issues. That all dissipates if you treat people as individuals. And I'm fortunate, again, to have been raised that way. We didn't have a lot of minority groups where we live, but my parents never I never saw them visibly treat anyone different, gender-wise or racially. The little town that I grew up in when I was probably from the ages of 10 to, I'm not sure when she left, but one of the main RCMP police officers in our area was a Native Canadian woman. And nobody thought, I mean, she may have experienced some racism, but I certainly never witnessed it, right? I never saw any of it, and I certainly didn't see it from my parents. So I've always felt like I treat people as individuals first. It's sort of like the joke on the Stephen Colbert show, the Colbert Report, and it's not really a joke. Where whenever he talks about issues of race, he always says, "I'm colorblind. I don't see race." And I think that should be obviously the goal. We treat people as individuals, and race is just a characteristic, but it's not an important one in terms of how we deal with one another. And I think behaving as an individual, especially once the laws are in place to protect the rights of everyone, so that if someone is being discriminated against for any reason, they have avenues and they have advocates to help them along and to get satisfaction for that. I think it's very important for us all to then behave as individuals. Because the other thing that I see when people identify with a group so strongly and the group becomes self-aware is there seems to be a bit of a victim narrative, a victim mentality, and that is an energy which feeds the group. And I think that's dangerous as well. It's also a self-perpetuating thing, right? That group is never going to disband. The group whose sole goal should be to end, to have no need for that group to exist any longer. What a great liberation. It ends up actually feeding itself with this victim narrative. So again, watching bell hooks, there's a couple of things that really show me that victim narrative. On one hand, she was wearing a shirt. I can't remember the name, what it said on the shirt. It was obviously a feminist message. It was probably a racial feminist message because, of course, a lot of her discussions are on the black female experience, which is understandable. And she was wearing this shirt, and she said, "This isn't a shirt that a liberated bell hooks would wear." Let that sink in just a minute. If I felt that I was being held down in some way, and I'd made the strides that the feminist movement had made, feminist movement has made, I would not identify myself as an unliberated person, even if I felt there were still things to be done. Because I think it's very important how you see yourself and how you project yourself to the world is extremely important. That doesn't mean that you couldn't still fight for the areas in which you see inequality. But I would not self-identify as an unliberated person. I think that sends a bad message. It's funny because I was listening to the Underground Railroad Radio, which was the content provider for a video I made recently about the porn industry and astral babies. And I was listening to another one where they were talking about, this whole idea of the secret, that thought, projects out and creates your reality. And, I would think these are probably people who travel in some of the same circles. Now, I don't know if bell hooks buys into that, the secret or not. But what I find interesting is, once again, sort of confirmation biases that exist there. But there is some truth to it, right? Now, these guys on the Underground Railroad Radio, they were going way off base because they were talking about how there was a book written in, 1896 or so called Futility, I think it's called. And it was about the sinking of a ship called the Titan, or just Titan. And the similarities with what happened to the Titanic some 14 or some odd years later, even the month that they sank and the conditions under which they sank and things like that. And their conclusion is that, see, thought creates reality. Of course, there's a massive, massive confirmation bias there because they don't make any mention of the countless books that have been written to which no real life event that has any significant, similarities whatsoever occurs, right? However, I do believe that there is something to how your thoughts, we know that your thoughts actually change your health. We know this now. Even the placebo effect is some indication of this. But certainly when you see yourself a certain way, it changes how you interact with the world. And it can change on a subconscious level even how you project to people and how they respond to you, which then is going to impact opportunities and other things like that. So I think it's actually quite dangerous to continue this victim narrative, especially once a lot of inroads have been made and a lot of work has been done. I think then it's time to identify as an individual and drop the victim narrative. And you can see how desperate it actually becomes and how irrational. And I think we should all be striving for individuality and rationality and empiricism in our personal lives. And I think that would help a lot in our society. So in another bell hooks, it might have even been the same lecture, I'm not sure. She was talking about how there are a lot of black public figures who one might think are positive role models for children. They were talking about Beyonce, although I don't know if she was referring to her specifically. They were talking about, of course, Barack Obama, but I'm not sure if she was referring to him specifically. But what she was saying, maybe Nicki Minaj, I don't know. What she was saying is there are a lot of black celebrities, public figures that may not be actually the best role models for young black people. And it would be a good idea for the parents of black children to discuss with them about these things and to actually expose them to other historical black public figures, and maybe even not so public figures, people that they know in their private life who are more exemplary of what they would hope that they would try to emulate, as they grow up and whatnot. And the reason why this doesn't happen very often, according to bell hooks, it's because of the oppression, because they just don't have the time. I mean, what a massive cop-out to say that the reason that black parents don't spend enough time teaching their children about the pitfalls of some of these public figures and guide them a little bit more towards people that they would want them to strive to be like, to say that it's because, I guess, they're so oppressed that they're working, 16-hour days, and they have no time to spend with their children at all to mentor them. I mean, it's just a complete cop-out to blame that on, as she calls it, the white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal, I can't remember the whole deal. And that's what she does. That's the mantra, right? Every time they talk about some issue, they spew out the mantra. And the mantra is, we are victims, we are victims, we are victims. We can't do anything. We can't do anything about this. And it's a complete cop-out. I mean, I would never, if there's something, it's funny, my daughter is, in her early 20s, and I think I did a reasonable job of raising her, but there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things, if I knew then what I know now, there's a lot of things that I wish I had done differently. But the one thing I've never done is I've never blamed it on somebody else. If there are failings, they were my failings. Even if I didn't know better then, because what I could have done then is I could have said, I want to be the absolute best parent possible. I must research, and I must make time. That's how we behave responsibly as individuals, and don't identify as part of a group that has this need to sustain itself and fulfill itself. There's probably more that I have to say on the subject, but I think this has actually been not too bad of a ramble. So I'm going to leave it there. And please, 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 as always, I really love you people. I love the comments that I get in the comment section. I love it when people disagree. And I love it when people agree. And I love it when people have things to add that I didn't think of or see. Share your experience. That has been as rich for me as anything, is when people share their personal experience, because it helps. I mean, I have actually had kind of, in some ways, a sheltered experience, because I wasn't exposed to the vast sea of people that some of you have been in my early childhood and early adulthood. And even now, I still live in a fairly small town, although I do interact with a lot of people. But we'll leave it there for today. Thanks as always for watching. Take care.